kind of curious to see what it's about. So let's go dive into it, shall we? True, Temtem was not that popular compared to Palworld's popularity. But I'm curious to see.
Pocket Pair just confirmed what we all suspected, that the changes
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what this is all about.
made last November were indeed motivated by Nintendo's lawsuit.
Of course.
Now, if you're out of the loop here, the update made pals spawn next to the player rather than spawning from balls. But today's story is not just the confirmation of that, it's also what happens next, because Pocket Pair are now saying that this is not the end. Even more changes are coming to the game, and not because they're changes that players really want to have made. Basically, Nintendo are very much still at it, and Pocket Pair have outlined how they're going to fight back. Thanks to reporting from the specialist outlet GamesFray, we now have some idea of how Pocket Pair plan to defend itself. Now, this comes from filings in February reviewed by GamesFray at the Tokyo District Court. Basically, the plan is to prove that Nintendo should have never been granted their patents in the first place, and this comes down to a pretty simple concept. So Nintendo filed patents in December 2021 that have been iterated on after Palworld released. Now, those most recent patent updates were filed after Palworld came out, but they were, right, extended from previously filed patents. Now, under patent law, that's allowed, where the principle is that the natural evolution of the patent under, continued development should also be protected. But there's a natural counter to this, and that natural counter is called prior art. And prior art is what Pocket Pair intend to use. So the idea is that prior art existed before the original 2021 filing date, where the combination of two separate mechanics could reasonably give rise to the patent Nintendo holds. So as an example, everyone's pointed to the idea that Pocket Pair's previous game Craftopia also had a ball capture mechanic. Now, Pocket Pair is not arguing that Craftopia alone means that Nintendo never should have been granted that patent, but by acknowledging Craftopia plus the influence of other existing games, the patented mechanic could be arrived at naturally through regular development processes, as opposed to, say, nabbing it from Nintendo and infringing upon their patent. Basically, as GamesFray puts it, when you add any of the following to Craftopia, you get to the same place that Palworld did, and that they're accused of infringing Nintendo's design with.
Let me see, hold on. So Rune Factory 5, Titanfall 2, Pikmin 3 Deluxe makes it easy to see how the player's characters can perform the actions to release a monster or a captured item, like a ball, and fire it in a direction by releasing the button. Pikmin 3 and Deluxe, Far Cry 5, and Tomb Raider already show that there can be different types of throwable objects. Pocket Souls, Octopath Traveler, Monster Super League, and Final Fantasy XIV made it easier to imagine that one could pick targets. Is that what it says? Pick targets? Or pick tragets? Might be a typo, probably, on the field, and then show the indication of how likely to capture the operation is succeeded. Generally speaking, it has been an element of Pokemon series for more than 30 years that different capture items can have different success rates.
So let's just make that feel real by bringing in some actual other video games, right?
Yep.
So games like Rune Factory 5, Titanfall 2, and Pikmin 3 Deluxe all feature a character releasing monsters/capture items in a direction by releasing a button. Yes, your Titan in Titanfall,
Wait, Titanfall 2?
is a Pokemon. Jokes aside, you get the point though. Pikmin, Far Cry, and Tomb Raider all highlight that you have a variety of throwable objects as part of their mechanics. Meanwhile then, you've got Pocket Souls, the mod for Dark Souls, Octopath Traveler, and Final Fantasy all showing that you can pick targets on a field with a visual representation of how successful you might be. Okay, so those are broad examples, they're varied examples. I guess there's also the example of the Pokemon GTA mod, but basically, it's no coincidence that Nintendo games find themselves present in these lists. Pocket Pair are basically banking on the validity of Nintendo's patents being granted as their main argument here, right? That they shouldn't have been granted, that is, that they're not valid. And the more that they can muddy the water around whether Nintendo should have them, the better the chance that the whole case gets thrown out. But there's a question to be asked of this situation. The Japanese lawsuit is ongoing, and these changes won't necessarily stop that right now. So why make them, right? Why would Pocket Pair do all of this whenever it might seem they're making some progress. Well, that's because they might not influence Japan, but they might have an impact on the potential American lawsuit.
That's
Fun
good.
situations
Yep.
going down in the US, many of them in fact, but let's just stay in the patents for now. So generally, whenever someone loses 22 out of 23 arguments, that's not really seen as victory, right? You'd think that, but it's not necessarily the case in patent law, and I've got some good news here. Game Phrase Explain It to Me Like I'm 5 series. That means that the rest of us can actually understand what's going on. And yes, thanks to them, because this stuff can be so goddamn dense. So, per their explainer, Nintendo have been making more moves in the US with applications to the US Patent and Trademark Office. Now, these take a while to resolve, so today's set of updates will range from starting back in 2022 through to February of 2025. And to simplify things, Gamefrey explained that Nintendo have been recently granted several patents by the office. Patent 1 relates to capturing a character in a field environment, so like any recent Pokemon game. Patent 2 is about players exchanging items, and Patent 3 is about using an aimed item to capture a fighting character. Rather obviously, all three of these could be applied to Palworld, with the latter two filed in 2022, while the first was filed in May 2024 after Palworld's release. Now, these are all matters of record, but they strengthen any case that Nintendo wants to make in the US about Palworld. And as for the losses, well, those losses are actually new. So 22 of the 23 losses came in the form of another application for a patent, this time a patent about riding objects in-game. Gamefrey reported this as having been served a final rejection where, as part of the claims regarding the patent, Nintendo had 22 of their 23 claims be rejected. But it turns out you only really need one for it to be a problem. Now, that last claim only needed to be reworked for the patent to be granted. So Nintendo is very much not defeated in America, even though 22 of their claims for this patent,
Thank you for the follow. Welcome.
weren't accepted. And there's actually a lot Nintendo can do. They can appeal the decision, they can rework the claims in line with feedback, or they could even try to convince the patent examiner that some of the 22 rejected claims are valid. And that all seems like a lot of work just to try to toss one more patent on top of the pile that they're accumulating in the US.
Jesus Christ.
But it's Nintendo. They're mercs legally. And it's actually wider than just them. And that's not just my opinion. It's directly from the mouths of people who actually make the patent decisions, because they are huge business. In January of this year, we got to see things from the perspective of the people who actually file these lawsuits. Automaton reported on the, quote, importance of intellectual property rights in the games industry at Tokyo Esports Fiesta 2025. This was attended by Capcom, Nintendo, Sega, Konami, and Koei Tecmo. So Sega and Konami's representatives framed these mechanical patents in a way that was very explicit, that it's about incentivizing developers to make new systems and then protecting those systems from being stolen and recouping the high costs of developing games by licensing. And the latter part in particular was the real value of all of this work, rather than potentially risky or expensive lawsuits. But patents are also a significantly more useful tool to have than just copyright alone. Capcom's representative echoed Nintendo's with the idea that they can protect their brands, right, from infringement or damage via patents, and it's basically another tool in their arsenal, especially when brands are capable of skirting full copyright, but say can capture the spirit of a game. So for them, it's not necessarily, at least they frame it, about stamping out competition or punishing smaller teams for trying to innovate by iterating on other games. It's more about protecting what they have from other companies, big or small, not necessarily great. And that's why Nintendo, for an example, files patents for every mechanic in their games, regardless of the likelihood of them being granted. And it's that leaves the companies that breach those patents in hot water. Yes, in a way that can feel very direct and targeted, like what we've been talking about here, but also just in a systemic level, right? In that this is kind of how the system ends up working. They just make a point of filing patents for everything, right? Because they have then maximum coverage. That means, well, they can use those to further whatever ends they may have. And it's for that reason that, within Palworld, we're seeing all the fun business around gliding, in addition to the fact that the pals now spawn beside you instead of out of a ball. But okay, now that we've explored a lot of the situation, let's bring it all together.
Okay.
First off, this is not going to be resolved quickly. That's just not how this stuff goes.
True.
And especially if these lawsuits expand to the US or further afield. Pocket Pair is clearly planning to take Nintendo on to the best of their ability here, despite Nintendo's legendary legal track record. I mean legendary. All of their
I am rooting for Palworld to win. That's basically how I'm rooting for. I want Palworld to win against Nintendo, just to give them a good old slap across the face or so for being stupid as shit. Because Nintendo is just a terrible company at this point, you know. Besides, you know, the Nintendo Switch prices, the game prices, the accessories are being also raised on top of that. They've also, you know, copyright strike content creators in the past a long time ago. And the list just keeps going on and on and on. And also this stupid legal case that's been happening for about like what? It's been happening for almost about roughly 2 years now, maybe a year and a half. Just because Nintendo just doesn't want to make any good games for their Pokemon, you know, or Game Freak technically, so
lawyers are John Wick type people. So if they can win, it will be a brilliant David and Goliath story. But with companies like Capcom and Sega very happy to explain that these patents are part and parcel of game development now, it's not necessarily going to be an earth-shattering change either. It's not going to be a case where Pocket Pair could win and then standards and all sorts of things in the industry would change. No, not really. The system's too big, there's too much money in it, and realistically speaking, like so many things, it inherently does favor the incumbents, because guess what? They actually have got the resources to do all of these patent filings, right? They actually have the resources to do those things. That means that, say, if everyone was to have an equal quantity of patentable innovation, who are the people who would be most able to act on that opportunity by using their resources? Is it the small little indie team?
I'm also wanting Palworld to win because I really want to play the game, but with Nintendo suing them and having them take away the changes content, I am waiting to the... Yeah, that's the only reason why like I didn't bother picking it back up again, is because, you know, I'd rather play it the way how it was intended on the first day, where you get the sphere, you know, the PAL sphere, you throw it, they come out, ride your PAL, you know, instead of using a glider, you know, or they just magically spawn beside you, you know.
Or is it the company with a humongous legal department? It's obviously the latter, and that's how it inherently plays in the favor of the incumbents. That's why the likes of your Capcoms, your Segas, etc. are all happy to talk about how this is an important part of modern game development. Big happy smiles. I suppose we'll just have to see what happens to PALs next. But anyway, as fun as all this is, if you want to get the lowdown on a very spicy new business model of, hey...
I'm hoping this gets resolved, because I don't really want Nintendo to have that, because then there's not going to be any innovation in the gaming scene. Because remember, right? Because this specifically this moment, right? This is reminding me back when Warner Brothers, I think if I remember correctly, they got copyright. They did a patent or so on the game mechanic of the Nemesis system. Was it a patent, or was it a copyright infringement? Or not copyright infringement, but they just have full ownership of that specific mechanic. And then unfortunately nobody else can use the stupid Nemesis system, and fucking Warner Brothers doesn't even fucking use it, you know? That's what it reminds me of. This scares me or so, because I'm really hoping that Nintendo loses so that Nintendo gets nothing in return. They get a fucking slap across the face. And then on top of that, we will be able to have, you know, we won't have any problems. People, you know, trying to innovate the mechanic itself, you know. Let me see. What was it again? Let me see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it was patent. Okay. This is the reason why, because it just gives me a lot of flashback of this, you know, when the fucking Warner Brothers got fucking patent for the fucking Middle of Earth Shadow Mordor, you know, for the Nemesis system. It's just like, this is scary. I don't like any of this shit whatsoever. That's the only reason why it just gives me like PTSD from this, just this itself, you know. That's why I'm hoping, I'm like really crossing my finger that, you know, that Palworld actually comes out on top against Nintendo. I'm like crossing my fingers right now, because, you know, because the way because if I remember correctly, the way if we go back a few months ago when they were like kind of like showing it, it was very vague for their like patent control, you know. It was like super vague, so it wasn't even like wasn't really descriptive on their game mechanic patent. So yeah, it was called the Nemesis system. That's what it was called. I don't know. I thought the Nemesis system was really cool. It would have been so very innovative to have it in other games, but Warner Brothers is like, ha 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 ha, no, fuck you. And that's the only problem. I don't want any company or anything like that to own, you know, to patent certain stuff like that, you know, because then there would be no innovation in the video game industry whatsoever, and we'll be playing like bland, boring games, you know. So, but yeah. Anyways, that's just my personal opinion. I'm just hoping this gets resolved. Hopefully they'll add the animations back to as well to Palworld once everything is settled with, and hopefully, crossing my fingers, hopefully that Palworld wins. But that's just my little, you know, small brain of mine, you know, trying to comprehend stuff like this. But yeah. Yeah, hopefully. And then the reason why gacha games are on the top over these AAA games, yeah. But the problem is the problem is specific on that, you know, the Nintendo going after an indie game just because it got popular. But yeah. Anyways, that's the end of the video. You guys can comment, like, subscribe, do all that fancy jazzy stuff. Yeah, you know, I'm hoping. I'm just cheering for Palworld. That's it. That's all I really care about. Hopefully Palworld wins. Yeah, say goodbye to the YouTube frogs. And yeah. Honestly, I just give out my support to Pocket Pair. Yeah. Anyways, that's the end of the video. And peace.